I'm here, thank you.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. We'll get started in just a moment.
I now call to order this regular meeting of the Anchorage Assembly. It is Wednesday, October 27, 2021. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Ms. Allard?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Ms. LaFrance?
Here.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Ms. Zolotel?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Mr. Perez Verdia?
Here.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Before we proceed, I want to note that Assembly leadership has tried to enforce the Assembly Chamber's COVID-19 mitigation plan, which requires people to wear masks in the chambers. It's a little more restrictive than the emergency ordinance. However, the municipal manager has instructed security to not enforce the policy. I would like to give the municipal manager, Ms. Demboski, the opportunity to address this issue. Ms. Demboski, would you like to address this issue?
I would. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Amy Demboski, Municipal Manager, I want to point out the comments of the Chair are inaccurate. At no time did I tell security don't enforce a policy. What I did relate to leadership, the clerk, and security, as well as members of the public who were standing outside the Assembly chambers that were being barred by direction of Assembly leadership, was I reflected what, in fact, the Department of Law told me relating to this potential conflict. What I was told by the Department of Law, the Assembly passed an emergency ordinance that allowed for exceptions to the mask mandate. If a person falls into one of the categories with an exemption, for example, if someone has a disability and cannot tolerate a mask, if they verbalize it pursuant to the EO that the Assembly passed, then they have an exemption. What I have relayed to all of these people, including members of the public who are being barred from entry by Assembly leadership, was the fact that if you have I relate to them what the Department of Law said, if you have an exemption that qualifies pursuant to the emergency ordinance that the Assembly passed, then you must verbalize it. At no time have I commented or said that the Assembly COVID policy wasn't allowed. But what I did say was the Department of Law indicated to me that policy does not trump law. The Assembly should follow the law that they passed.
Thank you, Ms. Demboski. We will now move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Coy, would you lead us, please?
For which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Constant, would you read the land acknowledgement, please?
A land acknowledgement is a formal statement recognizing the indigenous people of a place. It's a public gesture of appreciation for the past and present indigenous stewardship of the lands we now occupy. It's an actionable statement that marks our collective movement towards decolonization and equity. The Anchorage Assembly would like to acknowledge that we gather today on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Athabascans. For thousands of years, the Dena'ina have been and continue to be stewards of this land. It's with gratitude and respect that we recognize the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspectives of the Upper Cook Inlet Dena'ina.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Vice Chair, could I get a motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting of July 1, 2021?
I move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded, asking for unanimous consent. Seeing no opposition, the minutes for the special meeting of July 1, 2021 are approved. We'll now go to the mayor's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the mayor, this is Municipal Manager Amy Domboski. Today, the mayor is not with us today, but Mr. Baker is here sitting in his chair to help us navigate this meeting. Alongside, we do have a number of directors that are on the line. The only update that I'll give you for right now is that if the Assembly had inquired as to the enforcement mechanism for the mask mandate emergency ordinance that they had passed, and I would like to report to the Assembly that through working with the Department of Law and the IT department, we have a reporting mechanism that is on the municipal manager's page. So if individuals would like to report an alleged violation, they can simply go to muni.org and then click on the municipal manager button, and it's right there on my home page in the upper right corner. In addition, a copy of EO 2021-3 as well as some literature links are on there. So if businesses in the public would like to utilize some notifications that they could put on their doors, those are also linked on the Community Manager's page. If people have questions, they can certainly contact the Municipal Manager's office, and my staff or myself will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. Next, we have the Assembly Chair's report. First off, it's my intent to start the public hearings on the budget items at 8 p.m. this evening, and if we are unable to get through our agenda tonight, we can plan to continue the meeting to tomorrow here if need be. Second, Assembly Resolution 2021-191 requires the Assembly Chair and Vice Chair to make periodic updates to the COVID-19 mitigation plan for Assembly chambers. Pursuant to that resolution, and following the Assembly's adoption of EO 2021-3, the Assembly COVID-19 mitigation plan for Assembly meetings in the chambers has been updated. Version 7 of the plan has been posted online and is available here in the chambers. It's also been shared with members, and members who are here in the chambers should have a copy of the resolution and the updated plan should have a paper copy here on the dais. It is further adopted as a ruling of the chair and applies to tonight's proceedings. However, I would like to offer the body the opportunity to once again adopt this plan as updated with version 7 and authorized by AR 2021-191.
I move to adopt or move to approve this plan.
Second.
The motion to approve the updated COVID-19 mitigation plan for the Assembly meetings has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Members may proceed to vote.
Well, Madam Chair, sorry, I'm fumbling around here. I'm sorry, so I lost track here. So we have the 2021-191, and is there a revision to that? Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. No, there is not a revision to the resolution because the resolution itself states that, starting on line 18, that the COVID-19 mitigation plan for Assembly chambers can be updated quickly and nimbly by the Assembly leadership and staff as circumstances and guidance for the Centers for Disease Control and the Anchorage Health Department change. And so the version 7 of the COVID-19 mitigation plan for the Assembly chambers is attached, and and I'll go through it later to highlight some of the changes, but primarily it requires masks or face coverings to be worn at Assembly meetings, and it limits the assembly chambers to 125 persons total and the Wilda Marston Theater to 150 persons total.
All right. Thank you.
Ms. Allard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a point of information that I would like to ask, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I just would like clarification, and I'm okay if law chimes in, Madam Chair, on the COVID-19 mitigation plan for the assembly chambers is not actually law. And I would also like to find out if we are violating EO 2021-3 by trying to supersede it by a document that I would call memorandum for record, the mitigation plan.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. We'll go to Mr. Gates. Mr. Gates?
I'm not sure I pushed the right button here. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. So I understand the question from Ms. Allard is whether we're violating the law by adopting this COVID-19 mitigation plan for chambers. That's a little different, or a little more restrictive than EO 2023. Is that right? And no, I don't believe we are. I believe, as a legal matter, similar to businesses and who have management authority over their own premises for their business and so forth, that the Assembly has authority over our meeting premises. Here, we can be a little more restrictive than EO 3. We can't be less restrictive. That would be in violation. This is a little more restrictive, nothing in conflict. And that's the way I see it.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Any
Madam Chair,
follow-up, Ms. Allard?
I'd like to ask the Muni manager, or the Muni attorney for their perspective and their legal opinion as well, please. Mr. Burke?
Mr. Burke, are you on the line?
Patrick Burke, for the record, through the chair. I mean, the Department of Law's position on this is that provisions of EO 2021-3 are current law and take precedence over an assembly mitigation plan pending a full public hearing on the management authority ordinance, which is, I believe, on the next agenda. The charter states that the executive and administrative power is vested in the mayor. Title 29 of Alaska statutes provide that the executive power of a municipality is vested in the mayor, who, among other duties, exercises custody over real and personal property of the municipality, except the school district. So I'm sorry if I lost track of the question there, but I think charter is pretty clear as to the administrative and executive functions of municipal government.
Madam Chair, can I do a follow-up with Mr. Burke?
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Allard, and
Thank
then
you,
I'd like
Madam
to
Chair.
move through the queue.
Mr. Burke, can the Assembly be legally held liable for violating EO 2021-3 as law if we impose additional mitigation plan without it being approved by law?
Patrick Burke, for the record, through the chair. I don't know that I want to comment on that, Ms. Allard. I would encourage the Assembly to follow the provisions of Emergency Ordinance 2021-3.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Thank you, Mr. Burke. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since we have the attorneys here and Mr. Burke online, I'd like to ask a question, too, in regard to some legalities. Thank you. So from Mr. Gates' understanding of the law, that the Assembly, or at least in the chambers, similar to a business, would have the ability to be more restrictive. So I wanted some clarification on that from a business standpoint. So in other words, since we have passed AO 2021-3 that provides for an exemption for people that need one, I'm under the assumption that that means that a business would have to actually allow that exemption. But if the same principle is to be applied to businesses that I believe is trying to be applied to the assembly, we're actually saying that a business would be allowed to defy the order, or at least that particular part of the order, in not allowing for any kind of mask wearing exemption. So my question would be, is that true? Would a business actually be allowed to defy this order and not provide for any exemptions for anybody not wearing a mask into a place of business? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Your question really gets into some finer nuances of legal interpretation of both the executive and legislative powers and EO 2021-3 and how it will be interpreted and how it applies and so forth. And perhaps my analogy to the assembly and assembly chambers to a business is not exactly the best analogy to use. I was trying to make it straightforward and off the cuff here. No, I wouldn't say that businesses can defy the emergency ordinance, excuse me. I don't think, though, that the COVID-19 mitigation plan for chambers is doing that. I don't think it's defying Emergency Ordinance 2021-3.
Go ahead, Ms. Kennedy.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Gates, but I guess that really is my question. What it boils down to is if a business cannot ignore that part of the law, how is it that the assembly can? That's the distinction I'd like to figure out. You know, why is one held to a different standard than the other? Thank you.
I actually don't think that we're saying it's okay. So Section 4 had a list of activities and situations and persons, and I'd like to pull up EO 2021-03 to give a clearer answer, but you'll have to bear with me if we're going to go into this analysis. It's going to take a little time.
Ms. Kennedy, we'll give Mr. Gates some time, and I'll go ahead and...
Thank you for your patience. So Section 4 says the requirements of this ordinance do not apply to the following categories of people, businesses, people, or activities. And this list is very specific circumstances. And for example, here we look at subsection D of that section. Individuals removing their face coverings to eat, drink, or briefly scratch and itch, and you can do that here in chambers. So we're not really being consistent with a lot of these exceptions. Children under the age of 5 years, I mean, that's not really what's at issue here. Individuals performing an activity that cannot be conducted or safely conducted while wearing a face covering. I think any activity we're doing here, which is mostly speaking, can be safely conducted with a mask. Let me see. In Section 3 of the EO, we have a reasonable accommodation provision in Part A, where face shields may be permitted in lieu of a face mask or a mask or face covering for the following individuals. And some of this is the same as Section 4. And we have an accommodation here, a face shield is allowed, and then telephoning in for your participation in the meeting or viewing the meeting, or listening to it on the radio or viewing it on YouTube. These are all accommodations, so the public is not excluded from anything happening here in our meeting chambers. The meeting is still open through all of these venues. So with all of these accommodations, I just don't think that we're violating the EO here.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment, but you can go on to others in the queue for the moment. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to speak to you, Mr. Gates, but also to Mr. Burke. So I think the questioning from members Allard and Kennedy sort of mischaracterizes what the EO does. So before we passed the emergency ordinance, Mr. Gates, was it the case that a business could legally require face masks, masking in their premises?
Yes, that's correct.
That's correct, right. And so what we said with the EO was, here's the floor, and we'll give some exemptions to this legal floor. However, if a business wants to go above and beyond, so for example, we exempted all gyms from our legal floor, but if a gym decided, no, we're still going to require that, we're still going to require masks, they would still be legally allowed to do so. Correct, Mr. Gates?
Yes, that's correct. And that's what I was getting to at my first response about being a little more restrictive.
Right. It's a floor, not a ceiling, and the exemptions don't further lower the ability or reduce the ability of private entities or public entities that we aren't, like the federal government, for example, to set a higher bar should they so choose. So, for example, I was on JBEAR this past weekend, and we were required to wear masks. And they have, I believe, fewer exemptions than exist in our EO, and that is perfectly legal. Now, Mr. Burke, I'd like to ask you a question. So my understanding of what you said is the issue tonight does not turn on whether or not our mitigation plan violates the EO, because it doesn't. It turns on the fact that the mayor is asserting that he controls this chamber, and he, because of what you stated about custody of public property, and that he and his administration will not be enforcing the Assembly's mitigation plan, correct?
No. For the record, Patrick Burke, through the chair, I mean, I think you're confusing a couple of issues here. One,
okay.
Businesses can generally speaking enforce different policies as it relates to its business, and it has a different standard than what the government can do. But more importantly, the decision to require more restrictions, let's say in a restaurant, is made by management authority. And the issue here is that the legislative branch, the Assembly is a legislative branch, and the mayor is the executive. And I think so. It's both confusing private business versus public administration, confusing who has management authority. And again, I still haven't heard a legal theory that would allow an Assembly policy to take precedence over enacted law.
So, Mr. Burke, I think you actually restated what I stated. You stated that the mayor has management authority of this chamber. Is that correct?
The mayor has management authority over municipal property, but for the school district.
Right, and we are in municipal property. Now, we have said this chamber is where we have our meeting, and so we want to enforce this COVID mitigation plan. And what you're saying is the mayor has not agreed to enforce this mitigation plan through his management authority, correct?
I mean, I don't know that it's the mayor saying that so much as it's the charter, right? And the mayor is following the express language of the charter, so I don't know that it's the mayor unilaterally making a declaration. I mean, he is following what is listed in the charter.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Burke. Can I ask one follow-up question, Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
To the municipal manager, and I'd like to ask this question of the mayor, but for the municipal manager or for anyone in the administration, will you use your management authority to enforce the COVID-19 mitigation plan as put forward by the Assembly in this chamber?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, thank you very much for the question. It is the position of me, as the person who in Charter Section 503B has the authority to administer the government, that we will enforce the law.
I'll take that as a no. I mean, the
I didn't say no. I said we will enforce the law. Don't put words in my mouth.
So the mitigation plan is being requested essentially. When we assert that we can do this here, you're asserting that we can't. Is that right?
Mr. Dunbar, I've asked and answered your question multiple times. We will follow the law. The law in question is EO 2021-3. That law allows for exemptions that this body passed. We will follow the law, Mr. Dunbar. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Okay, we will go back to Ms. Allard for a final time in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to go on record of public record stating that I in no way want to violate the law, which is 2021-3, that anything in the mitigation plan that violates anybody with the Americans with Disabilities Act, also Section H of 2021-3 of any sort of discrimination. I am up here as a body member representing my constituency, and I don't want it to be used against me that I'm here to vote and represent the constituency as I can see. And I will say that during the Supreme Court's decision of when we had 17 members in the chamber versus 15 was upheld because it was the law. And I am in no way in favor of violating it. And again, I just want to go on record that I stand with the law, not a document that we say is the law and it's not. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Ms. Kennedy, for a second and final time in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move to amend the mandatory safety measures by including a statement under the first masks or face covering statement that says, exemptions will be honored per compliance with the Assembly EO 2021-3.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Ms. Kennedy, would you like to speak further to your amendment?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. What this would do would basically acknowledge the fact that there is such a thing as exemptions. We already know that there are exemptions, even the ones that were included specifically for the mayor's staff will be allowed. And it's setting a different standard if we decide that the public's exemptions are not valid in these chambers. And I find that terribly just unfair. And what it does too is it turns the assembly into some kind of legalistic authoritarian in regard to trying to enforce this when we know that there are people with legitimate reasons for needing exemptions, and that's why we put that in the ordinance to begin with. So I can't imagine that we would just unilaterally say that we're no longer going to provide any kind of exemption for anyone. So I think we need this in here, and I think we're better off not having some kind of fight and argument over it. I think it was terribly mischaracterized that the motivation behind this had something to do with an argument over management authority, but I do think we have a law in front of us that's very, very clearly talks about the facts that there are individuals, I mean in Section 4H, individuals who cannot tolerate a face covering due to physical or mental disability. And I don't know that any of us have the right to quiz somebody on that, but I think we need something in our own safety measurements that at least recognizes that there are significant reasons by some people in the public that this exemption needs to be maintained. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. And would you repeat your amendment one more time, please?
Thank you. It's very simple. Exemptions will be honored per Assembly EO 2021-3.
Thank you. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think there's a gross misunderstanding of what the ADA is intended to do. The ADA is intended to provide broad access with or without accommodation to individuals with disabilities. The exemption is not carte blanche authority or ability to not have to take advantage of other accommodations offered, whether a face mask, telephonic participation, watching over the live stream, or listening on the radio. In fact, That's why those accommodations were explicitly pointed out by Assembly leadership. Individuals in here who are unmasked actually prevent the participation of those who cannot run the risk of being around individuals who could possibly have COVID. Individuals with disabilities can often not receive a vaccine or may not have immunity even with a vaccine. So now we are in a position where we are de facto excluding other individuals. And this has come up repeatedly at the federal level where states have prohibited by law school districts in particular from being allowed to institute mask mandates. And they have found that that is discriminatory. So by not allowing Assembly leadership to institute the requirement for masking or otherwise acknowledge appropriate accommodations which are being provided, we are in fact excluding a whole nother group of individuals from these chambers. It is time that the mask mandate be followed and that the Assembly leadership be able to institute COVID mitigation measures as they deem fit and as they deem fit with the advice of counsel. So I oppose the amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to go on the record opposing this amendment as well, and speaking plainly and clearly about what just happened over the last 30 minutes. The Assembly is trying to, and as its right, to implement policies for this chamber, and the administration is clearly saying that they control this chamber, that they have the ability to determine what the rules are in here and not us. And that's not been the practice. And that's what Mr. Burke said clearly, twice, over the phone. And so this is not about implementing the law, and this is about the administration clearly trying to enforce their control over this room. And I think it's really important that goes on the record, that this is not about law, or this is not about protecting people's rights. This is about asserting control, and I think it's really unfortunate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perez-Verdia. Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to reiterate a little bit of what both Mr. Perez-Verdia and Ms. Zalatel just stated. This policy that we have before us for consideration does provide accommodations. It does follow the emergency order. Face mask, if not that, face shield, or the other ways to participate. So it's amazing to me that we are even having this discussion and that this amendment was even proposed. We need this public space to be safe, and it is very clear that we are being prevented from making this place safe by the administration. So I will be voting no on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the amendment to add language to the section under mandatory safety measures. Exemptions will be honored per Assembly EO 2021-3.
Mr. Peterson?
No.
Mr. Rivera?
No.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
No.
The amendment fails 3-8. We now have the main motion before us. Mr. Weddleton?
Oh, thanks. A couple of points come out on this, and one is, if we are, is the intent to exempt the mayor's executive staff like it is in the 2021-03? And then another point is, I saw this first when I got to my seat today, and if the accommodation for people who can't wear masks is that they could call in, well, it's too late for them to call in. So we haven't really provided that. So I guess I'll make a motion that this would not become effective until our next meeting, which is November 9th. Is that right?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. I'm just clarifying that actually this will be an amendment, that the COVID mitigation plan won't go in effect until November 9th?
Or not until November 9th.
Until what?
No, will not go into effect until November 9th.
Until November 9th. Okay, and that was seconded by Ms. Kennedy. Did you want to say anything else about the amendment?
No, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. I'll go through the queue to see if anyone wants to speak on the amendment. Mr. Constant?
Nope.
Okay. Ms. Kennedy on the amendment?
Yes, thank you. I will support, well, I'm supporting the amendment because I still think that there are enough questions up in the air about this. We have, even if we didn't honor the amendment previous in regard to compliance with the emergency order, I think there are still other things that exist in that emergency order that we probably need to address. Would this particular mandatory safety measure or mitigation plan be adopted? Because there are certainly, the mayor and his executive team is on there. So I guess the question would be, if anyone walks into this chamber, are they held to this higher standard where there is no exemption for anybody not wearing a mask? Or is there potentially, particularly for people that have to be in here, is there an exemption for those that really do have significant health-related needs? And certainly the mayor and his executive team. So that would be my question, that I think those kinds of things probably need to be addressed before we actually do implement this particular policy, as I suspect it will pass. So I will therefore support the amendment to give us a couple weeks to make sure that we figure all of this out in terms of the practicalities of how it would be implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Allard on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm in the same thought process with Ms. Kennedy, and I'm concerned that I don't support the amendment, but it's in order to soften the blow, I'm going to end up voting yes for it. But one of my concerns is that we are kind of going back and forth about the chambers and who it belongs to. But during the time when the ventilation was to happen within the chambers, we were told the administration was responsible and in control of that. But now they're not. And then my other question would be, before everybody votes, those who are unable to attend because they wear or would like to wear a mask, can they use other accommodations? And are we discriminating against bodies who don't want to, and that some that do? But I do appreciate Mr. Weddleton bringing this amendment forward to give us some time to go through legal and determine where we stand on it. I, as a person with a disability, I understand what Ms. Zolotel was saying about we can't just use it as carte blanche. I understand that. But we do have American with Disabilities Act for a reason, and I just want to make sure we don't violate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the amendment to move the effective date of the COVID-19 mitigation plan to November 9.
Mr. Peterson?
No.
Mr. Rivera?
No.
Ms. Quinn Davidson? No.
The amendment fails 4-7. We now have the main motion before us. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. Just one second. I want to point out that we have conflicting messages from the administration on what the basis is of their claim to be able to overrule the Assembly's COVID mitigation plan. The first claim is that the charter authorizes only the mayor to have control over all facilities, which effectively is the setting of the time, place, and manner of an assembly meeting, which is a clear violation of the separation of powers. So I look forward to that question being resolved, that the Assembly has a right to establish the time, place, and manner of its meeting. Conversely, or kind of flipped on its head, the other side of the administration is saying that no, we're just trying to enforce the law. And we've heard clearly that we are allowed to have a policy that is more restrictive, but I would say the Assembly can and does adopt its own rules of procedure. Those become law too. AR 2021-191 is in fact a law as well. The plan is adopted pursuant to that law, not EO3. That is not the law that's in question today, as much as members of the administration would like to make it about that. Therefore, although it's kind of hard to understand which argument we're really facing, this will all be sorted out in the fullness of time. But I ask the members to adopt this plan so we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
If I might re-adopt this plan.
Okay, members may proceed to vote. Ms. Allard, I'll just note that you've already been in the queue and spoken to the main motion twice, so we're going to go ahead and proceed to a vote.
Madam Chair, I would like one more turn to be able to ask the Muni Manager a question, please.
Go ahead, Ms. Allard. I just want to note that this is a third time on the main motion.
That's great. Section 5.03, Manager in the Charter. Could the Muni Manager speak on that, Section A, B, and C, please?
Thank you for the question. Give me 1 second. Okay, I think I found it. Madam Chair, Assemblymember Allard, through the chair, what you're referring to is the responsibilities and duties of the municipal manager in the charter. We're not talking about code, we're talking about charter. For the record, Section A says there shall be a manager appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the assembly. The manager serves at the pleasure of the mayor. The manager is selected solely on the basis of professional qualifications. The manager need not be a resident of the municipality at the time of appointment, but must be a resident while in office. Section B, the manager is responsible to the mayor for the overall conduct and administrative functions of the municipality. Section C, during the temporary absence of or incapacity of the mayor, the manager shall assume the powers and duties of the mayor except emergency and veto powers. Assemblymember Allard, what this refers to effectively is the separation of powers term that likes to be thrown around so ineloquently, I should say. The manager is responsible for the overall administration of government. That means, unlike what Assembly Council said, the manager is responsible for the administration. That's operations, that's premises, that's the police department, that's the fire department, that's billing. It's the overall administration of government. That is the role of the executive branch of government. With respect to qualifications, I don't think that's what you were referring to. And in the point when the mayor is not available for whatever reason, if in his absence, I step in if it's on a temporary basis. Obviously, if he's incapacitated, then it would be the chair of the assembly. Does that answer your question, or did you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I actually have a follow-up question, Madam Chair. It's just real quick,
Go
just
ahead.
for clarification. Thank you. And if the Muni Manager wants to answer, or legal is fine, it's in regards to an assembly resolution. And I want to get it on legal, on record, so that we know it's not law. And if one of the administration can answer that, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe the Municipal Attorney Burke is on the line, and if he can weigh in. But it is, my non-legal perspective is an assembly resolution is not law. That is not an ordinance. But I would defer to the Department of Law, Municipal Attorney Burke, to answer that question.
Mr. Burke?
Patrick Burke, for the record, through the chair. So a resolution is law, but an ordinance takes precedent over a resolution. Resolutions are more like a recommendation from the body, but they are technically law.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Thank you, Ms. Allard. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to point out the irony of the member from Eagle River Chugiak in wanting to follow this emergency ordinance to its T when she had previously been documented not to follow mayoral emergency orders. I am really disappointed, frankly. We had passed an emergency ordinance that was very clear. Assembly leadership is trying to keep the public safe and do the right thing. I urge the members to vote yes to get this into place, get it into place tonight. And those who cannot tolerate a mask or a face shield to please ask for an accommodation that you could participate via the telephone or watch online. These chambers need to be safe for the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zolotel. Ms. Kennedy, you've been in the queue already twice on the main motion. Okay, my apologies. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually just have a question. I suspect this is going to pass, and then I suspect very quickly then we're going to have several people, including children, in this facility that will be considered out of compliance. And so I was just wondering what will happen next. I think it would be fair. Like I said, I'm particularly concerned about the children that are here, and I certainly don't want to see this erupt into something ugly where we've got people being hauled out. So I was just curious as to how this might play out from a practical standpoint once this is actually passed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Kennedy, is that a question to me? Actually, Mr. Gates is in the queue.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to briefly respond to the references to Charter 503B, the municipal manager's authority being responsible for the overall conduct of the administrative functions of the municipality. And I just wanted to point out that that's a very broad and general provision in Charter. And there's a maximum of statutory construction that lawyers often rely on. And something that's general is general. Something that's addressed as a specific matter, it's governs over a general rule. So I want to point then to other provisions of Charter. I also want to point out that the Assembly is responsible for a great number of administrative functions that the municipal manager is not. Elections, for example, and that's assigned in Charter. One other thing I want to point to is in our Charter we also have Section 4.04, and whoops. This assigns to the Assembly to elect a presiding officer known as the chair, and we have also, that's in 4.04A, we also have in 4.04C, the Assembly by ordinance shall determine its own rules and order of business, and we have adopted a great number of ordinances in Title II of our code, which address our rules for the Assembly and our procedures. And we have in there assignment of the presiding officer, or how to elect the presiding officer, the chair. We have in there rules for our public hearings and so forth. We have in there our adoption of Robert's Rules of Order, which gives a number of duties and responsibilities to the chair. And some of these can all be seen as administrative functions that the municipal manager does not have authority over under that broad general grant of authority over administrative functions. They're specific to the Assembly. So I just don't think pointing to 503B is an end-all of that argument. So with all due respect to the municipal manager, of course, we're not trying to take over the fire or police and all of that. We're just looking at our Assembly meetings and these Assembly chambers and specific rules about it.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. And would you also address Ms. Kennedy's question concerning if the Assembly approves this version of the COVID mitigation plan, what might follow in terms of enforcement at this meeting?
Well, I think as the chair, you mentioned at the beginning of our meeting, we have our mitigation plan and we have contracted security guards here who help us enforce our plan when directed to by someone in position of authority, such as the chair. And then we do have, if that's not complied with, if a crime occurs, police are here. So there's some enforcement mechanisms in place.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to approve the updated COVID-19 Mitigation Plan version 7 for the chambers.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davidson? Yes.
The motion is approved 8-3. I will now continue with my report. I want to go over a couple points in the updated COVID mitigation plan and a couple other items. First off, mask or face coverings must be worn at all times in the assembly chambers during assembly meetings and in the Wilder Marston Theater when it's used for assembly meeting overflow. For individuals who cannot tolerate a face covering due to physical or mental disability, the Assembly offers the following reasonable accommodations. Face shields may be worn in lieu of a mask. The meeting can be viewed on the Assembly's YouTube page and is being broadcast on KRUA 88.1 FM. Individuals may submit written testimony or testify by phone using the phone written testimony form. The deadline to sign up for phone testimony is 5 p.m. the day before the meeting. There is no deadline for written testimony. Per the mitigation plan, no more than 125 people, including media, may be in the assembly chambers at the same time, and no more than 150 people in the Wilder Marston Theater. The plan also calls for distancing between persons and a plexiglass shield at the podium and states that people experiencing symptoms or who receive a positive test for COVID or who have had a recent close contact may not attend in person. These measures are to protect staff as well as members of the public, the administration, and assembly and their households. This is due to the ease of transmission of COVID-19 in a public gathering environment and the serious illness that can result from the virus, up to and including death. The measures are also intended to help ensure that the assembly can continue to do the city's business. It is the chair's intention to enforce this mitigation plan. Next, in my report, I'd like to remind assembly members to treat each other with respect and refrain from speaking about another member's possible motivations. This is proper and helps the assembly conduct the city's business. It's also in accordance with the law. Per Anchorage Municipal Code 2.30.080.e, conduct of debate and discussion, quote, every member, while speaking, shall confine the member to the subject under debate and shall not refer to any other member except in a respectful manner, end quote. Section 2.30.080.I further states that, quote, in all matters not covered by this chapter, Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, shall govern, end quote. Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, 12th edition, section 4-30, page 39 states, debate must be confined to the merits of the pending question. Speakers must address their remarks to the chair, maintain a courteous tone, and especially in reference to any divergence of opinion, avoid injecting a personal note into debate. To this end, they must never attack or make any allusion to the motives of members. Section 43-21, pages 371 to 372 of Robert's Rules further state, when a question is pending, a member can condemn the nature or likely consequences of the proposed measure in strong terms, but a member must avoid personalities, and under no circumstances can a member attack or question the motives of another member. The measure, not the member, is the subject of debate. If a member disagrees with a statement by another in regard to an event that both witnessed, the member cannot state in debate that the other's statement, quote, is false, but the member might say, I believe there is strong evidence that the member is mistaken. The moment the chair hears such words as fraud, liar, or lie used about a member in debate, the chair must act immediately and decisively to correct the matter and prevent its repetition. At the last regular meeting, there were transgressions of decorum by assembly members. I call attention to these sections of Anchorage Municipal Code and Robert's Rules in an effort to prevent these types of transgressions from recurring. Lastly, I'll go over a few rules for the chamber. I ask for help from members of the public to create a climate of respect. Please keep signs to 8.5 by 11 inches in size. Refrain from personal attacks. Direct comments to me or other people on the dais. Please remain quiet while others are speaking. Wait for your turn at the podium to speak. Respect the personal space of other people and refrain from shouting, clapping, pacing, and personal attacks. Noise also interferes with the audio and makes it harder for people to hear what other people are saying. It's the job of the chair to maintain order during the meetings. Robert's Rules of Order newly revised, 12th edition, Section 61-8, page 609 states, quote, all persons present at a meeting have an obligation to obey the legitimate orders of the presiding officer, end quote. So please stop speaking if a point of order is called so I may rule on the point of order and the record is clear. If rules are not followed, I may interrupt speakers to call for compliance. If compliance with the rules doesn't occur, then I may pause the meeting. If there's an actual disruption, I will give a warning. If the disruption persists or happens again, the person will be asked to leave. If you are here to testify in a public hearing item, please state your name, community council, or area of the muni in which you live. Please stay on topic. It's helpful if testifiers provide comments on any proposed amendments. When you speak, you'll have 3 minutes, and community council representatives will have 5 minutes. Assembly members don't typically answer questions during that period. That comes later during the debate portion, as this is public testimony. So welcome, and we will now go to committee reports, and we will start with Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Constant, you are recognized.
Thank you. The question I would ask the chair to direct to the municipal manager is, are you now going to enforce the COVID mitigation plan, which I believe would be handing out masks to the individuals not wearing masks, and then we can get to asking those who are unwilling to comply to leave. And that's the question I would ask you to direct to the municipal manager.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Demboski?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Constant, I'm going to answer your question in a series of statements. I recognize this feels, no, let me change that. This feels like a trap that the Assembly is setting to catch the administration. The administration recognizes EO 2021-3 as the Assembly passed it, and we are trying our best to apply the law. Assembly Council previously went through the list of exemptions that will be recognized, including children under the age of 5 and a variety of other things. However, he skipped over the part in the exemption where if someone says, I have a disability and cannot tolerate a mask, that they have an exemption. So again, as prescribed, as advised by the Department of Law, exemptions are allowed pursuant to this body's law that they passed, the emergency ordinance that they passed. The administration recognizes the emergency ordinance, recognizes the concepts within it, and the exceptions within it. We will recognize the exemptions that this body passed in their emergency ordinance. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Constant?
So what you just heard is that the administration is not willing to implement the COVID mitigation plan and has restricted us from being able to do so. They are therefore not allowing us to set the time, place, and manner of our meeting. Therefore, I move to adjourn.
Second.
Coward.
The motion to adjourn has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Cowardice.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Allard.
I just want to recognize that what was just quoted by my colleague was not said by the Muni manager at all. That is not what came out of her mouth.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if we adjourn this meeting, is it your intent to set a special meeting at some later date before November 9th so we could take up some of these matters?
Bail hearing. You're going to jail.
Thank you, Mr.
Madam Chair, Mr. Williams is speaking out of turn. I would like him to be warned.
Mr. Williams, please refrain from speaking out of turn. This is a warning. Mr. Dunbar, to your question, given that there are a number of time-sensitive items on the agenda, it is my intent to continue to the next practicable time, which I believe is tomorrow evening.
Thank you, Madam. May I ask, or may I have a brief follow-up to that then?
Yes, go ahead.
So I supported Mr. Weddleton's amendment to postpone the implementation of the COVID mitigation plan because I do think it is because it came out today, some folks might not have brought, for example, a face shield that they might not otherwise have, or they might have. But I did think, unfortunately it failed. I considered making another amendment that was a little bit closer in time. I think adjourning tonight, resuming tomorrow, helps with the notice issues that Mr. Weddleton raised. And by tomorrow night, there'll be a much clearer understanding of what the requirements are in these chambers to comply with the COVID mitigation plan, or use one of the reasonable accommodations such as telephone testimony. I guess my last request is that if we do adjourn, that the clerk's office takes down the names of people who maybe want to testify by phone tomorrow. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Weddleton?
Well, thanks. So were we to adjourn until tomorrow, the cutoff for doing phone testimony would have been 5 o'clock today, so that would preclude them from taking advantage of that. So we'd either have to waive that rule and let them get on the list through sometime tomorrow, 3 o'clock tomorrow. I don't know what it would be. Clerks would know better, but we'd at least give that opportunity.
Please don't be on your phone during a meeting.
I didn't know that. You know what? This is a lot of bullshit.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. We could definitely find a way to accommodate folks through a list that the clerk's office would manage for ensuring that some folks here tonight who are not masked would have an opportunity to testify telephonically.
This is our right to testify in person.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Any follow-up, Mr. Weddleton?
No, thank you.
Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to be on the record saying that I cannot believe how juvenile of an action this is. And I understand that there's a power struggle going on. Nobody's got that, everybody gets it. But the more we keep doing this, the more vindictive things get, the more vengeful things get, and at some point, we've got to stop. And we're doing this all because of this, this piece of paper that people are asked to wear on their faces. And I'm telling you, it doesn't do much at all to actually stop COVID. If you can't risk getting COVID, then don't be sitting next to somebody. And I keep telling people that over and over. But the problem is now we are actually absolutely letting this interfere with regular government functions. We've spent over an hour talking about whether or not the few people in this room that don't have a mask on should be asked to leave. And that is irrational to me. absolutely irrational that we could be so vindictive that we have to make sure everybody's following the law. We have to be so legalistic to make sure that everybody's following the law, which in other words is to make sure that every single person in this community is wearing a mask at all times. And I just believe this is it's gone too far, you guys. And at some point, we have to figure out how we get past ourselves, if you will, and go about doing the business of governance. This shouldn't be about personalities. This shouldn't be about whether or not I get my way or you get your way or whoever gets their way. This should be about being able to move forward. And obviously, it is absolutely embarrassing and a shame to me to think that we're going to do these kind of power plays just so we say we did, just so we say we could. So anyway, I'm going to vote against the adjournment, and I hope that cooler heads will prevail. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you,
Madam
Ms.
Chair,
Kennedy.
for the second time tonight, Mr. Williams is making an actual disturbance.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Mr. Williams, your final warning, please don't speak out of turn, don't applaud out of turn. Thank you.
Through the chair, there was multiple noises going on
Mr.
in
Williams, please, no more. Ms. Allard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There is no doubt that this is petty. I find that this is appalling, and this is just minor. This is just the steps that they want to do to try to recall our mayor. But beyond that, I do have a question to the administration, and I would like to know, as a sitting elected official,
Point of order.
coming in here to represent my
Ms.
constituency.
Allard, please hold on. We have a point of order. Mr. Constant?
The member from Eagle River was just speaking to motivation, and it was out of order.
I didn't point out anybody.
No, agree. Ms. Allard, please,
So, thank you,
please
Madam
refrain,
Chair.
Ms.
Yes,
Allard.
Madam Chair, I
Please
will.
refrain from speaking to motivation as to why folks vote a certain way or support something. Thank you. Go ahead.
Sure. I want to know, as a sitting elected official, elected by my constituency to sit up here, if when I come into the chambers at our next meeting, am I going to be physically removed, arrested, or am I going to have security remove me from the chambers?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Allard, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to disclose a conversation that you and I had recently. You have indicated to me that
Well,
you
wait.
have...
Okay, I trust you.
Okay. You have indicated to me that you have a disability which makes it difficult for you to tolerate a mask or inability to tolerate a mask. Therefore, it is my interpretation pursuant to my authority in law as passed by this body and in charter that you do have an exemption. So, Ms. Allard, if we apply the law, that means there would be no grounds for your removal or arrest.
Thank you, Ms. Demboski. Thank you, Ms. Allard. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the motion to adjourn or continue the meeting to tomorrow, so there is time for the public to request accommodations or to obtain a face shield if that's their chosen accommodation. I've heard there's the right to testify in person. It is not an absolute right, and is not a right at the expense of someone else. Someone else with a disability may be unable to access these chambers because there are people here who are unmasked or not taking any mitigation measures. With regard to whether or not these are simply power plays between the branches of government, this has been a significant departure from the administrations in the past that have honored and recognized the chair's authority to set the rules for the chambers and allow the assembly to conduct its business in the place, time, and manner it deems appropriate. So I would urge the body to agree to the motion to adjourn or continue to tomorrow so that we can take care of the need to allow for accommodations, and then we can get on with our business. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. A few things. First, I would ask the seconder if we might change the motion to a motion to continue. The clerk has notified us that that's a proper motion, not a motion to adjourn.
Yes.
So before us now is the question of a motion to continue to tomorrow. Second, a member stated that this is just simply a juvenile action and they're ashamed. I can tell you, I saw a juvenile action tonight when the chair and the leadership of this body, Ms. Allegreza.
Point of order.
Ma'am,
You gave me
please,
the loser sign.
ma'am,
I don't know what you're talking
Please.
about.
He gave me the loser sign, and you're going to say
Madam
something
Chair.
like that?
please, you are out of order. Please,
He's talking
stop.
juvenile, giving me the loser sign.
Please
I don't even
refrain.
know what to do with that. So let me get back to the
Madam
point.
Chair, point of order.
Ms. Allard, what rule do you believe has been broken?
Mr. Constant is now going on the attack, which we've all said
I
we
did
are
no
not going to
such
be
thing.
doing, and here he is interrupting. That Ms. Kennedy said we were being juvenile, Mr. Constant did not do a point of order. Mr. Constant is now attacking persons of the administration, members of the community, and all of a sudden, this is okay for him to do. It's not. You just clearly stated Robert's rules. You clearly stated how you wanted things to go according to code. Let's be respectful. We're not going to agree, so I'm not really sure why he needs to continue to attack individuals. If I'm offended by it, he should refrain.
Thank you. Go ahead and make a ruling.
Actually, I have a question for Ms. Allard in terms of, I mean, you're right, there have been words used to describe what's been going on tonight as words that I think
You
are
said
not...
motive, and there's motive. He's accusing people of saying and doing things they're not saying. He's accusing people of motive.
Okay, so I will say that please, members, refrain from addressing motive. Thank you, Ms. Allard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, a juvenile action that I witnessed tonight was an effort to allow people to come in despite the COVID mitigation plans and against the rules of the Assembly and its ability to set its time, place, and manner. Then it was stated that this is just a piece of paper and it doesn't do anything, and this is a power struggle just so we say we could. What I've witnessed in the last 3 weeks after the hearing started in this chamber is that people are now dying from their participation in these meetings. Literally, people are now dying. And so the efforts that this body is attempting to address are life and safety. These are basic life and safety issues. This is not about juvenile behavior or attempting to make everyone in town to wear a mask at all times and all places. So,
If members of the audience would please refrain from shouting. Ma'am, in back, please stop.
Kick us all out of here. Go ahead and go home.
That is your first warning. Okay, I
call
need...
the question.
Madam Chair, point of order.
Okay, I'll withdraw.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Perez-Verdilla. What
Madam
rule
Chair.
do you believe has been broken?
I call the question.
Sully the man's name. Disgusting.
Is there a second to the motion to call the question?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Quinn Davidson. This is not a debatable motion, so members may, per Robert's rules, this is not a debatable motion. Members may proceed to vote on calling the question.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davidson? Yes. Ms. Allard votes no? Is that correct? Okay.
The motion to call the question passes 9-2. Members now may proceed to vote on the motion to continue the meeting to tomorrow.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davidson? Yes.
The motion to adjourn passes to continue the meeting to tomorrow passes 6-5. We will be back here at the chambers.
Run for re-election, Cameron Perez Verdilla. You're going to be voted out. 100%. 100% running out. First person to leave. Coward. Constant. That's a disgrace, sir.
We will be back here
Disgracing a man's
tomorrow
name
at
after they
5
passed
p.m.
away. Christopher Constant, you're a disgrace, sir. I'd be like if he was saying something.